Well, good morning to you all. It's been a delight to share a couple days together as brothers and sisters and as friends also. It's been a real blessing just to be here a couple years in a row and deepen those friendships. And in keeping with this year's theme of persevering in the church plant and what can we do to make all this just more sustainable so we don't flame out, in 3 to 5 years. So this topic is specifically about home life and family life, coals for the home fire. So a number of years ago, our family went to Southern Ohio to be with Kristen's family for an extended weekend getaway. And so the destination for that trip was a small ranch just kind of in the rolling hills of Southern Ohio. And so this ranch was just tucked up in the hills. And then one evening, there's kind of like a pavilion. And outside the pavilion, we built a really, really nice hot fire. And I can actually remember if we were going to be eating supper over that fire, or if it was just for kind of the comfort and the ambiance. So there we'd started, got this fire going really hot. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, this rainstorm came through and just pummeled this fire. Just absolutely pummeled it. It was like the windows of heaven just opened. And it had to have been one of the hardest rains I've ever seen. So here or there, we're just like in the pavilion and just watching this thing dump on our fire. So eventually the storm did move on. And we came out to inspect what had been our fire. And what had once been our blazing fire had been reduced to pretty much nothing. So what does a flooded campfire have anything to do with church planting? Okay, so some of you are thinking, well, after 5 years, this is pretty much how every church plant looks, right? No, that's not how every church plant looks. But what it does have to do with church plant life is that the reason that we are church planters is because we want to light the fire of Jesus in our neighbors. We're not in this for ourselves. If we were in this for ourselves, just wanting to make people happy, we'd probably go sell ice cream or something. But we want to light the fire of Jesus in the hearts of our neighbors. And so we dream of this day when in our neighborhood, when every hearth is glowing with a passion for Jesus. And not just in our neighborhood, but a day when all the earth is filled with the knowledge of the glory of God. That's what we're dreaming of. However, as church planters, we have a known weakness. And our known weakness is the home fire. And so often the hearths in our neighborhood get more attention than a hearth in our own home. And so we're so focused on meeting the needs around us that it's easy for us to overlook the needs of our own family. So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about here. So pretend like whether it's at home or at work, and your neighbor calls and they need you to come over immediately. So the answer probably is generally yes, not always, but generally it's like, okay, the neighbor needs help, a seeker needs help, we pretty much come right away. So how about when our wife calls and says she needs us to come home immediately? Is that an automatic yes? It's like, well, it's more complicated, right? Like, is there other ways we can get this job done without me having to come home right away? And that's sort of weird. Like we'll do for our neighbor what we don't do for our wife. That's just sort of weird. Okay, so why am I passionate about coals for the home fire? So 6 years ago in Central Illinois, we planted a home church with 3 other young families. Brand new experience for all of us. None of us had church leadership experience. We were coming from a denominational setting. And so for 5 years, church life went decently. Then almost overnight, what had been normal church life in 4 families became 2 families. Accused, confused, and exhausted. And it was a gully washer that we didn't see coming. And so our family was the oldest in the church plant, and for 5 years we had done everything we could to meet the pretty intense needs of the other families within our church. And here we are at a moment in time when pretty much it felt like all of our investment for those 5 years went up in smoke, is what it felt like. And so we had our own moment of reckoning, which was, would our own home fire survive this deluge? We had tried to stoke the fires of others around us, and in our situation, we didn't really have a lot of capacity even for the community. It was primarily just the families in our church. But when the heavens opened and dumped on our fire, would our own home fire survive this deluge? Or would we as a family stagger into the future, wanting nothing to do with Christianity, nothing to do with church planning, and at worst, nothing to do with each other? So as a disclaimer, our story isn't written yet, and so I have some thoughts to share today. I'm not holding up our situation, our family, our approach as answers for you. Other than to say that our family is all here, our church plant is alive, that I just want to share a few things that potentially could help, at a minimum in your own home, simulate conversation about what can we do about our own home fire to survive what could be a potentially fatal blow, because this does happen. So in discussing the needs for coals for the home fire, here's two things I am not saying. I am not saying that outreach and ministry are not important. I'm not saying that. I'm also not saying that our families must be in perfect shape before we invest in ministry. So to be clear, I'm not trying to make balanced statements today, but these are things I am not saying. But what I am saying is that it's not okay for the evangelist to go tell sinners that they're going to hell and then comes home to his fatherless son who is already living there. So I'll say that again. It's not okay for the evangelist to go tell sinners that they're going to hell and then come home to his fatherless son who is already living there. I am saying if our calling requires us to abandon our family, it's not from God. I'm also saying God has an opinion about this. So Paul writes this in different contexts for different purposes, but I think the broad principles apply here. If a man does not know how to steward his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? And also, and this is specifically talking about widows, he says, if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially those of his household, he's denied the faith and he's worse than an unbeliever. So it doesn't make sense for us to go seek the unbeliever with a witness that we're not even taking care of our own, and in doing so, we're actually worse than the unbeliever. So just to reiterate, God does have an opinion about this. So like I said, these are just some thoughts to share. I'm not prescribing this for anybody's situation. I'm not holding us up as an example of what this should look like. These are just some things that have been really helpful for us that I think have helped us survive what had been our own church crisis. And just breaking up into three different components. The first one, so I'm primarily talking as a father and a husband here, but all of this would apply for the wife also. The wife has different responsibilities in the home and in the church plant, but at the end of the day, a lot of these principles also apply there. So I'm going to be talking about presence as a father and a husband, provision as a father and a husband, and also the protection that comes with our roles as fathers and husbands. Okay, so the first component is presence. So one of our favorite verses in the New Testament in John tells us, the Word, Jesus, became flesh and dwelled among us. And so we take a ton of comfort in that God cared about us enough that he didn't just abstractly fix the problem on earth, that he came in a body to share all of this with us, to take upon himself the pain, the sin, and to get the story going in the right trajectory, that he took upon himself and became flesh and dwelled among us. So your children have an imaginary Bible, and they have their own version of this verse. And that version says, and Dad became flesh and dwelled among us. And I think especially for children whose dads either aren't present in the home or are at home but not emotionally present, if there was one thing in the Bible that was true, if they knew that this was true, that my dad became flesh and dwelled among us and I was known by him, then they would know that the Word became flesh and dwelled among us. But if they don't know that Dad became flesh and dwelled among us, it's going to be a little bit of a stretch for them to think that Jesus became flesh and dwelt among us. If they didn't feel it from Dad, how could it be true to feel it from Jesus? So in talking about presence, about dads being present, being actually in our body among our family, just a couple thoughts. So the first one was, so we've been in our church plant journey for 6 years. So 3 years into it, I was ordained as the leader of the church plant. And I can't remember if it was Saturday, I think it was Saturday. Saturday morning, we shared with our children that was what was going to be happening later in the day. And so as we were sharing that with them, we're sitting in our living room, kind of in a circle, and we shared that with them, their faces just fell. And Dad's going to be ordained to lead the church. And And the reason their faces fell is because they knew what that meant. That means that dad's always gone taking care of other people's needs, both in the church, outside the church. That means that dad's always overloaded with church issues, thinking about other things. That the person that had been their dad, that had been sharing life with them, in their mind, that meant that pretty much was over. And so in that moment, I committed to them that would not happen. I told them, if I can't be a church leader in your dad, I will vacate my role as a church leader so I can be your dad. That was my commitment to them. And I don't actually know how it can be otherwise. And saying all this, like, I realize it's complicated. Okay, nothing I'm saying today is like overly simplistic, like just easy answers. All of this is complicated to pull off. But it just didn't make sense to me to go take care of other people's issues and have my own children be orphans. So the second point, just in thinking about presence, is ultimately there is no substitute for time. So one of my favorite questions in relation to this is, if you ask a child, how do you spell love? They say, you spell love T-I-M-E. And there really is no substitute. We can give them lavish gifts. We can take them on wonderful vacations and all these other things, but ultimately there is no substitute for just time together. So we actually have to put in the time. And also to not just time being together, but we have struggled with, especially when we're working through church drama, there are times when we're physically together, but they're basically like, well, mom and dad, you've sort of been checked out for 3 days, like hushed conversations in your bedroom and elsewhere, like you're here, but you're not here. And so to the extent we can avoid that, which sometimes we can't, sometimes there are issues we have to talk through, but to the extent we can avoid that, we try to be emotionally present as much as possible. And the last thing to say about there's no substitute for time, and again, this is complicated, it doesn't work in every situation. So after we eat supper every evening together, boys and I do dishes together, we would generally have about an hour before it was time for 8 o'clock, time for bedtime, start heading that way. And so what worked for our situation is I was able to cut back my workday by a half hour. And so my company was good with that. I just cut back a half hour every day. So effectively, I went from an hour of discretionary time with our children every night to an hour and a half. So that's a 50% increase. That's pretty amazing. And so that happened to work for our family. I will admit, like, money is basically always tight for us. That was the end result of all that. But it's just the tension that we were willing to live with, to have money being tight, but having an extra half hour each evening with our children. So the second thing that we have tried to do too is we try to focus on the importance of rhythms in life rather than rescues. And so this kind of came to my mind probably about 5 years ago. A brother was just commenting about someone else. He said, oh yeah, he's great in a crisis, but the home life, like, not so good. And if we can flip-flop that and have really strong, stable, repeatable rhythms in life, that ultimately that means much more than swooping into the rescue in high-intensity situations. And so feeding into that, we have a principle that basically the big rocks come first. So I'm going to just describe this here. So imagine you have like a fish bowl, and you have 3 big rocks, you have 4 medium-sized rocks, you have 5 small rocks, then you have sand. And we want to get them all on this fish bowl. And so if we just take it as it comes and just kind of put stuff in, we dump the sand in first, and we kind of put the small rocks on top of that, medium-sized rocks, and eventually we try to get the big rocks in last. And the big rocks are that's the important stuff. That's like the have to have. And so we put those in last, and it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit in our fishbowl. Because we just sort of took things as we come. We didn't really have a priority. We just sort of put it in our fishbowl. But if we do this differently, and we put the big rocks on the right-hand side, you can see we put the big rocks in first. Then we take the medium-sized rocks and sort of fit those around the big rocks. And then we take the small rocks and fit those like where we can among all that. And lastly, we take the sand, the stuff that's just like nice to have but not really that critical. We like dump it, and it kind of filters around the rocks and fills everything in. What we find is, in the first scenario where we just took everything as it comes, it didn't fit. But if we put the big rocks in first and everything else around that, what we found is it actually works. So when we get to the point where we're saying, like, we don't have time for the important things in life, it's because we're not putting in the big rocks first. That's why that happens. So the priority, what we commit to first, does happen. So I'm going to give you a little example of what that looks like in our family life. Again, I'm not prescribing this for you, but this happens to work for us. And so what we've tried to do is to be very intentional about the big rocks, like especially the needs of our children, being teenage children, that's what we place into our life very specifically in a structured way. So 7 o'clock we have family worship. 7:30 we eat breakfast together. There's a couple nuances there. On Thursday and Friday we have a little drive-through bakery right outside our house. We're open for 2 hours on Thursday morning and Friday morning. So a couple of the children are out there. The rest of us, I do coffee one day with one child, out to eat with another child on Thursday and Friday. But pretty much 7 o'clock devotions, 7:30 breakfast every morning. And then, school is pretty much all morning unless we're having music lessons. Noon pretty much every day. I call Kristen over lunch just to see how the day's going. A couple times a month on Thursday afternoons we have homeschool PE. Afternoon is definitely more flexible, more discretionary time. 5 o'clock we almost always eat supper together and do dishes, and then after the children are in bed, unless they're doing something in the evening, Kristen and I will have talk time before we go to bed. Saturday evenings we do video education. But these are just examples these are just repeatable things that we do pretty much every day, that these are important to us. If we can't do this, or if life becomes haphazard and this sort of falls apart, we fall apart. That's just how it works for us. So this sort of comes first. And then the remaining time can be filled up with everything else. And so what worked for our church was, at one point I was meeting 3 mornings a week with the brothers to pray, either individually or as a group. And so we were able to do that while everybody was getting up in the morning and doing their exercise and personal devotions and all that. I would be meeting with them for prayer. So it didn't really take away from anybody other than just my own personal time. And that worked great for those brothers, so that sort of fit in. It didn't take away from the big rocks. Similarly, we found out we could do, if we needed to meet as couples, we would just go over there like 8 o'clock at night. Their children are going to bed. Our children are going to bed. We're available. They're available. So we could meet then in a way that didn't take away from their family time, didn't take away from our family time. If a brother wants to meet for breakfast, even someone not locally, I would probably meet him on a Thursday and a Friday, because then I don't have to miss our family breakfast. So there are exceptions. We make exceptions, but the point is that exceptions are exceptions. They're not the norm. And they are to be expected. But our life doesn't just become this jumble of all these exceptions, that the big rocks we really do try to make come first. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense when I talk about the big rocks coming first, what that means. So coals for the home fire, the second kind of overarching principle is just as a dad and as a husband, providing for our family. So I can still remember a time, and you probably can too, when you lived a normal life. Do you remember what that was like? So I think what we forget is that even when we had a normal life, our wife and our children still had a lot of needs. Like, that is life. They have a lot of needs. It takes a lot of care, a lot of attention, a lot of planning. And so if that was true when we lived a normal life, that they need a lot of investment and attention, how much more now that I've asked them to give themselves to an intense life of risk and pain? Like, they still need what they had before, and probably more than that, if I'm going to ask them to sign up for this church plant life. That we can't just expect to just sort of wing it and somehow it's going to be okay. Because that actually probably wasn't working before either, just winging it as far as giving them investment and attention. So some things that have worked for us in our marriage, I would say talk time is huge. That our lives are messy. There's no way around that. And so it's really important for Kristen to have talk time to help her process things, categorize them. That way she can move forward with confidence. Okay, like, I sort of know where we are. I sort of know what I'm supposed to be doing. Let's move forward. So what happens is if we don't have talk time for a while, what happens is life just feels like this big, messy monster. And it's very, very hard for her to manage. Like, what is this all about? What's going on? What am I supposed to be doing? So for us, talk time is huge. I'll also say homeschool support is huge. And I have failed in that. I have not been very involved in our homeschool effort. So we have had educational gaps. Sometimes 6 months, 12 months later, it's like, oh, this is where we are. Like, how do we not know this? But it was because I was not supporting the homeschool effort and engaging with that as I should have been. And sort of a side note, but just to say, this life of ministry that we're all in is going to magnify our marriage challenges. So, just to be expected. As far as providing for children within our group, within our family, just strategically for us as a family, that it's very important for us that when our children enter into adult life that they're well adjusted, that we don't want them to be like, socially they don't know how to connect with people, they don't know how to manage their finances, they don't know how to be introspective and deal with their issues. Like, that's not okay for us to do that for everybody else outside of our home, but not do it for our own children. So we do focus on kind of developing their worldview, providing education, providing skills, social development opportunities. And so that actually has played into our experience. Just one comment on that for me personally, I'm not willing to forfeit the development of my children so that they can instead do housework for a home where the father is distracted by his hobby projects. That I'm not going to give up the development of my children so somebody else can do hobby projects. If the father of the home they're helping in is not stepping up like he should be, I'm not going to give them extraordinary ways of my family to their own detriment. So something else that in our situation we've had to work extra hard at is that our children don't have a lot of local friends. And I think, I'm talking to some of you, that's pretty much almost across the board. And that is a huge part of being an adult, is knowing how to be a friend, knowing that you are a friend to someone, that you belong. And so, yes, we try to be their best friend within our own family. Our children are our best friends, and that's been a beautiful thing. It's also not enough. Like, they're going to have more than that. So we've had to work hard at, in our area, there's a homeschool group. So we're connecting with people in the homeschool group that admittedly are in churches that are very different from us. But it does provide some friendship and some of the social needs that otherwise are not going to be met in our situation. We've also worked really hard, even having to go out of the region to do Bible camps with other micro churches, to have weekend invites, having people in for us as a church. Just so our children can have some people that, when they're 18 and they want to call a friend, they actually have somebody to call. That's something that is very important to us. The last two things as far as providing for our children, that life is really intense and they're doing a ton of work, way more than they would have if we had just chosen a normal life. They still need to have fun. And they still need to play games. They still need to have memories and do trips and things together. And so that we do those things. And sometimes it's hard to justify, like, there's just so many needs back home or even among our own church to take a little bit of time just to have fun together. I just feel like it's a great tragedy for a child to get into an adult life and they don't really have memories from their childhood. That seems like a tragedy to me. And the last thing in providing for our children, somebody mentioned it, I think yesterday, about being transparent with them. And this absolutely can be overdone, but I would say the approach that we've tried to take is to be very real with them. You're in a church plant, you intimately know these people. The child intimately knows these people. They see when people make mistakes. The child gets hurt sometimes. And so we've just been very transparent, validating when they get hurt, like, yeah, you are hurt, and yes, that was not okay. And when they see somebody else make a mistake and they say it out loud, we affirm them, you're right, that was a mistake. In our situation, we had to be very real with them about the church crisis we were going through, that they needed all of that just to know the problem wasn't them, that it was other things. Okay, last principle, just to talk through a little bit here, is protection. And I would say this one also is huge. And so we found that there's three sort of areas for that, for me as a husband and a father. So the first one, which we were talking a little bit about yesterday, protection from overwhelm. So we can run it at 100% about 10% of the time. So there is no system that is designed to run at 100% for very long. If you go to the airport and it's 100% full of people, like things bog down, lines get long, people get irritated, that's the same in the systems of our family also. We are not made to run at 100% for very long. So I don't know what the number is, but maybe our family runs at a baseline of like 80 to 90%. We can ramp up to 100. There's been times where we've gone to 110 to our own detriment, but we cannot do that very, very long. And so if there's any skill that's been hard for us to learn, one of them has been it's really hard to say no. And so it's hard to say when someone says, hey, can I come and stay with you for the weekend? We're sort of on the verge of burnout already. It's hard to say, actually, no, you can't. We're not really doing anything, but no, you can't. I'm sorry, you can't come for the weekend. It's also hard to tell Mom, I'm sorry, Mom, we just can't make it for Thanksgiving this year. We're not going to be able to. Hard to tell whether it's the community or sometimes people in the local church. Like, we actually don't have plans Saturday night, but we don't want plans either. We really can't. Because depending on what else is going on, sometimes that is like the recuperation night. And if we can't do everything, we don't have plans, but we can't have plans. Just learning to say no. So I'd say when we've got this wrong, overwhelm it's the weed that creates all sorts of problems in a church. Protection from themselves. So this is primarily as a husband. I've had to protect Kristen from guilt. So I don't know if any wives know what I'm talking about when I say the husband has to protect his wife from guilt. Okay. So I've had to protect Kristen from guilt. And so I'm just wondering if we can forever bury the misconception of the Christian woman who is of course willing and available to bail out other people, even at the expense of her own health and sanity. So I'll say that again. Can we forever bury the misconception of the Christian woman who of course is willing and available to bail out other people, even at the expense of her own health and sanity? So I've had to reassure Kristen, like of course you would love to help, but you can't. And that's okay, and you don't have to feel guilty about this. Because it is hard. Like, as we were talking yesterday, we wish we could meet all the needs and be Jesus to everybody because we do care about them. If we married a yes woman, we're probably going to have to slow her down. We're going to have to protect her from herself. If we married a no woman, we're probably going to have to prod her a little bit. And I'm not suggesting that this is a challenge for anybody here. If your wife doesn't want to be part of a church plant, please do us all a favor and work that out before you go. And last, in covering protection here, protection from other people. And so this sounds bad, and when I talk about other people, I'm not trying to blame. I think a lot of times these behaviors are in innocence. That there are not really, people don't really know what they're doing when they participate in this. But as a father and as a husband, it has been huge and critical for me to protect my wife and children. And if I had not done that, I don't know if we necessarily could be in the same place where we are today. There have been times where I have failed to protect my family from takers. People who were eager to take and take and take. Whether it's dresses, meals, housework, babysitting, food preparation, piano lessons. That there have been people that were eager to take and take and take without putting forth any effort to provide a relationship in return. And so Proverbs 30, the leech has two daughters. They are give and give. And so what the consequences of that was, specifically for our children, they were helping a lot in the early years in other people's homes. There was at one point that we were sending two of our children 2 afternoons a week to go to other people's houses to do housework, to watch children, etc. And they were young. They were probably like age 9 to 14. Our 9-year-old son was cooking food in somebody else's house at one point, helping out. And so what happened was that, when they were giving, but there wasn't really any effort put into giving them a relationship, they came away, instead of feeling like a teammate and that they had dignity and they mattered as part of the team, they came away feeling like just a utility. And so one of our children said, when I felt most worthless in life was when I was helping the other families and not getting any relationship in return. So this is a big deal. When I felt most worthless in life, when I was helping others and not getting any relationship in return. So a couple things that we've adapted to and had to adjust to try to protect our children, at some level my wife too. So now if our children are helping a family and they're doing more work than the father, and the father's distracted with other things that are non-essential, we will step back to give space for the father to step forward. And that can be painful and it can create problems. But we will step back to allow the father to step forward into his rightful role. And so last comment on this protection, I have two statements on boundaries that have been huge for us. So boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. They're the best shot I have at keeping the second commandment, to love my neighbor as myself without being abused. And so when we have to create boundaries with people and say, well, actually this isn't how we do a relationship. The way you do a relationship when you come in is you come through the door. You don't crawl through this window. Relationship means you come through the door, not through the window. Instead of boundaries sound like walls, and I think it should be more like a relationship infrastructure, like just helping people see how to do healthy relationship. You can't really love your neighbor in a proper way until you love yourself in a proper way. And that's not selfish, that's biblical. Jesus said the second greatest commandment is to love our neighbor as ourself. And so boundaries are basically the way that we can pull that off without being abused. And it's going to make people mad. That's the reality. There are some people that will get mad when you have to create boundaries. But the only people that are mad when you create boundaries are the people that are benefiting from you having none. So last, just in relation to boundaries. So we've had experiences where I've had to protect my wife from toxic people. And so these are the kind that they tend to shoot themselves in the foot and then blame someone else for the pain and the mess. So several times I've had to insert myself and to basically say that my family is not responsible for the self-inflicted wounds of others. And so that's been a challenge, because when someone shoots themselves in the foot, there's sort of blood on the floor and whatever. My personality is I can pretty much pretend like it's not there, and you might not even know that I know. So I can have fairly high level of composure. My wife is not designed that way, okay? If there's blood on the floor and she has to tiptoe through there, you might get a couple nonverbals that might signal that maybe not everything's okay. There's some blood on the floor. And that's perfectly fine. That's who she is, and that's just how she's made. But when that happens, some people can get really squeamish about by that type of reaction. It's but it's a self-inflicted wound. The issue isn't that you get a couple of strange nonverbals. The issue is that there's blood on the floor. So I've had to protect my wife from toxicity. Okay, so you remember that campfire in southern Ohio, the one that got drowned by the gully washer. So in spite of the massive downpour, we actually found out that the fire had been so hot it had survived. So it still actually had a nice bed of coals under all there. It looked like the whole thing just got drowned out and doused. But it didn't. There was, underneath all of that, it felt like got a couple inches in about 10 minutes, that there were still some hotbed of coals underneath. And so we fed that thing, and within a few minutes, we had a fire that was roaring back to life. And so that is why in the persevering church plant that we need coals for the home fire.